In the outskirts of Gisenyi, Rwanda, there stood a house no map bothered to name. It wasn't abandoned, it wasn't ruined, and yet no woman who entered it ever came back the same. Some came out quieter, some came out older, some came out not fully there, and some never came out at all. Locals called it Numba ya Kurudi Tofauti, the house that returns you differently. The house belonged to an old widow named Mama Nirabera, a woman with clouded eyes and a voice that always sounded like she was whispering to someone standing behind you. She rented rooms cheaply, only to women, only one rule. If you hear your name at night, don't answer. Most laughed at that, until Aline Mukamana arrived. Aline was 23, a seamstress, newly alone after her husband disappeared near Lake Kivu without a body, without witnesses, without goodbye. She needed a place, she needed peace, she needed to forget. The house welcomed her too easily. That first evening, Aline noticed strange details. No mirrors in the corridors, all clocks stopped at 2:17, and the walls, once painted white, were covered with faint scratch marks, like fingernails dragged again and again, always at shoulder height. Mama Nirabera showed her the room. "Previous tenant?" Aline asked casually. The old woman smiled. She left. That night, the house breathed. Aline lay awake listening to floorboards creak where no one walked. The kerosene lamp flickered even without wind. Somewhere deep inside the walls, something moved, slow and wet, like fabric soaked in water being dragged across stone. Then it happened. A soft voice right beside her ear. "Aline." She froze. The voice sounded like her own. Her heart pounded as Mama Nirabera's warning echoed in her mind. "Don't answer." The voice tried again, closer this time. "Aline, open your eyes." Her eyelids trembled. The air grew cold. The room smelled suddenly of lake water and rust. Then she heard something worse. Another voice, a woman sobbing, from inside the wardrobe. Aline squeezed her eyes shut and whispered a prayer. When morning came, the house looked normal again. Too normal. But as Aline stepped outside, a neighbor stared at her and crossed herself. "You stayed the night?" the woman asked. "Yes," Aline replied. The neighbor's face drained of color. "Then why are you answering with her voice?" Aline opened her mouth to ask what she meant and realized with horror that the sound coming out of her throat was not the sound she remembered as her own. Aline didn't sleep the next night. She couldn't. Every time she closed her eyes, she felt it, a pressure around her throat, as if invisible fingers were gently reminding her who now shared her voice. That morning, when Aline spoke to Mama Nirabera, the old woman's eyes lingered on Aline's mouth a second too long. "You heard it," Mama Nirabera said calmly, pouring tea that steamed without heat. "It heard me first," Aline replied. The widow nodded, unsurprised. "Then it has marked you." Aline demanded answers. Mama Nirabera finally explained the rule she never told newcomers, only those who survived the first night. At 2:17 a.m., the house opens its memory. Every woman who ever stayed there leaves something behind, a breath, a sound, a name, a regret. The house doesn't forget women, it keeps them. That afternoon, Aline met the other tenants. There were 3. Claudine, who never spoke above a whisper, Yvette, who laughed at inappropriate moments, and Beata, who wore scarves even in heat, always hiding her neck. They all watched Aline with the same question in their eyes. What did it take from you? That night, Aline noticed something new, her reflection. There was no mirror in her room, but the dark window glass showed her faintly. When she spoke, her lips moved a split second after the sound came out. At 2:17 a.m., the house exhaled. Aline heard footsteps, not walking, but being dragged. Then voices began bleeding through the walls, prayers spoken backward, lullabies with missing words, names repeated until they lost meaning. From the wardrobe came knocking, 3 slow taps. Beata's voice whispered through the wall. "Don't let it finish the sentence." Aline didn't understand until the voice returned. "Aline, you left him by the lake." You dead husband's voice now. "You promised you wouldn't tell." Her chest tightened. The voice was telling the truth. Aline had argued with him that night. She had walked away first. She had let the water swallow the sound of his calling. The knocking grew frantic. "If you answer," Beata screamed softly, "it keeps your truth." The wardrobe door creaked open on its own. Inside wasn't darkness. It was a room filled with women standing shoulder to shoulder, mouths sewn shut, throats moving as if screaming without sound. All of them were looking at Aline. Their eyes begged her not to speak. The voice finished the sentence for her. "And now you belong to us." Aline screamed, but the scream didn't leave her mouth. It stayed in the room, absorbed by the walls. Morning came again, too clean, too quiet. At breakfast, Claudine was missing. Mama Nirabera placed an extra cup on the table anyway. "She answered," the old woman said softly. Aline touched her own throat and felt fresh thread beneath her skin. Aline stopped touching her throat, not because the feeling went away, but because every time she did, the house noticed. The stitching beneath her skin wasn't painful. That was the worst part. It felt finished, like a decision already made. Claudine's room was cleaned before noon. No blood, no struggle, just an empty bed and a faint smell of damp earth, like soil turned too recently. Yvette laughed while sweeping the hallway. "She must have told it something good," she said, giggling. Aline realized then Yvette's laughter wasn't joy, it was a leak. That afternoon, Beata finally showed Aline her neck. She removed her scar slowly, as if the air itself might scream. Around her throat were dozens of tiny scars, circles, lines, symbols, some healed, some fresh. "They practice," Beata whispered. "Every time someone speaks at 2:17, they learn a new way to keep us." Aline asked the question she feared most. "Can we leave?" Beata smiled sadly. "You already did, just not with your body." That night, Mama Nirabera locked the front door herself. "For your safety," she said. At 2:16 a.m., the house fell silent. No insects, no wind. Even Aline's breathing felt borrowed. Then the walls softened, not cracked, softened. Faces pressed outward from the plaster, cheeks, lips, eyelids bulging like drowned bodies beneath thin ice. They began to whisper, not in unison, but layered, overlapping, desperate. "We warned her," they whispered. "She didn't listen. He made her promise. I want my name back." Aline felt her own mouth move. She wasn't speaking. Something behind her tongue was. Mama Nirabera appeared in the doorway holding a candle made of black wax. "Do you know why only women stay here?" the old woman asked. Aline shook her head, tears sliding sideways into her ears. "Because women remember," Mama Nirabera said, "and memory is meat." She pressed the candle to the wall. The plaster peeled away like skin. Inside the walls were layers of women, some young, some ancient, fused together, their mouths sewn into the structure of the house itself. This house was once a woman, And she was never believed. Aline screamed inside her own skull. The voice in her throat spoke clearly now. Your turn is coming. At 2:17 a.m., Beata began to chant, not prayers, instructions. She ran toward the back door, screaming without sound. The house screamed back. When morning came, Beata's scarf lay neatly folded on Aline's bed. Mama Nirabera smiled at Aline. You have a strong voice, she said. The house likes you. Aline opened her mouth to beg. Instead, another woman's name fell out.
Aline woke with the taste of salt in her mouth. Not from tears, from lake water. Her room was cold, even though the sun was high. Her window, which should have shown the village road, instead showed a dark surface, still and endless. She stared at it. The lake. But the lake wasn't outside. It was inside the house now. Aline's heart pounded. She ran to the door, locked. Then she heard it, the familiar voice, her voice coming from the walls again. Aline, you promised. She didn't remember promising anything, but the voice continued, gentle as a lullaby. You promised to keep it quiet. You promised to never tell anyone what happened at the lake. The lake. Her mind snapped back. The night her husband disappeared. The argument, the cold water, the sound of his hands grabbing her sleeve. She had left him. She had left him there. The memory had been buried, but the house had dug it up. She turned to Mama Nirabera, who sat on the bed as if she'd been waiting all morning. You're lying, Aline said. The old woman's smile was calm. I'm not lying. I'm reminding you. Aline's hands trembled. She needed air. She needed to run. She needed to break the door, but the house didn't let her. The walls began to breathe, and the lake inside the window rose like a tide. Aline watched in horror as the water seeped through the floorboards. It moved like a living thing, flowing toward her feet. The house was flooding, and inside the flood, she saw something else. A face, a man's face, her husband's face. He stared at her through the water, eyes wide and empty. He opened his mouth, but the water swallowed the sound. Aline grabbed the doorknob. It was ice cold. When she pulled, the door didn't open. Instead, the wood groaned like a throat. From the other side, someone whispered, "She's here." Aline's blood froze. It wasn't the house speaking. It was a woman's voice, a woman she didn't know. The voice continued, closer now. She promised the lake. She promised the house. She promised me. Aline slammed her back against the door. What do you want from me? The voice laughed softly. We want what you took. Aline realized the truth in a horrifying instant. The house didn't keep women. It kept their missing pieces, the parts they lost and never admitted. Aline had lost her husband. She had lost her own courage. She had lost her voice. And the house wanted it all back. Mama Nirabera stood, holding a small wooden box. Inside was a piece of cloth stained dark, like a fragment of a shroud. This belonged to the last woman, Mama Nirabera said. Aline's throat tightened. That's my scarf. The old woman nodded. Every woman who leaves takes a part of another. The house trades. It grows. The lake rose higher. Aline's feet began to feel wet. The water reached her ankles, and the voice in the wall spoke again softly. Don't look at us while the lights are off. The lights flickered. The room went dark. The room went dark, not simply because the lamp died, because the house turned off the world. Aline stood frozen as the darkness thickened, like a thick, wet cloth wrapped around her eyes. Her heartbeat thundered so loud, she feared it would be heard by whatever lived inside the walls. Then she heard it again. Don't look at us while the lights are off. The voice was not from the walls this time. It was inside her head. Aline realized the truth with a sickening shock. The house wasn't warning her. It was trapping her. She stumbled blindly toward the door, her hand sliding across the wall like a blind woman. The plaster felt warm, almost alive. A faint sound reached her ears, a whisper like someone speaking through water. "Aline!" She stopped. She felt a presence behind her, a cold breath on her neck. The darkness shifted. Aline turned, but her eyes couldn't focus. Still, she saw something move, a shadow, but too detailed to be only a shadow. A silhouette of a woman. Her hair hung wet, her skin pale. She was standing in the room with Aline, and she was smiling. Aline's blood ran cold. She recognized the smile. It was her own. The woman lifted her hand and pointed toward the wardrobe. Aline knew instinctively not to look, but she did, because the house was winning. The wardrobe door was open. Inside, the darkness was not empty. It was a tunnel, a corridor of faces, women's faces, pressed against the walls like the inside of a grave. Each face looked different, yet each had Aline's eyes. And at the far end of the tunnel, Aline saw a woman sitting on the floor, her hands tied. The woman's mouth was stitched shut. Her eyes were full of fear. She stared at Aline as if begging for help. Aline's heart felt a piece crack. She ran toward the wardrobe. The woman inside screamed silently. Aline reached out, and the darkness inside the wardrobe surged forward like a wave, pulling her in. She fell into the tunnel. The air smelled of rot and lake water. She tried to scream, but no sound came out. She was surrounded by faces that weren't quite alive. They whispered, not words, but memories. And one memory was stronger than the rest, Aline's own. Her husband's face appeared in the darkness, closer than before. He spoke clearly finally. "You left me." Aline shook her head, tears burning. No, I didn't. I tried to save you." The voice changed. It was not her husband's voice now. It was the house's voice, deep and satisfied. "You did not save him. You saved yourself." Aline tried to push forward, but the tunnel walls tightened. The faces pressed closer, their mouths opening. And in the darkness, the stitched woman, her own twin, began to speak with Aline's voice. "The lights are off because the truth is hidden. If you look, you see what you refuse to admit." Aline felt the cold sting of something sharp near her throat, a thread, a needle. The house was stitching her. The lights flickered back on. Aline was standing in her room again. The wardrobe was closed, but the air felt different, like the house had swallowed something from her. Mama Nirabera stood at the doorway, holding a candle that burned with a strange blue flame. "You saw her," the old woman said softly. Aline's throat hurt. "My twin?" she whispered. Mama Nirabera nodded. "Not a twin, a replacement." Aline woke up to a village that sounded different. Not quieter, not louder, changed. The air outside her window felt heavy, like a thick blanket laid over the world. Birds didn't sing, dogs didn't bark, even the wind seemed to avoid the house. She stepped outside and saw why. Women stood in the road, gathered in clusters, eyes fixed on the house like they were waiting for something to come out. Mama Nirabera stood in the doorway, calm as a priest waiting for a confession. The women were whispering. Aline couldn't make out the words, until one of them saw Aline. The woman's face twisted in shock. "Aline?" the voice called, but the hope died as soon as it reached Aline's ears, because the voice was not the woman's voice. It was Aline's voice. The villagers stared at Aline as if she had become a ghost. "Who are you?" one woman demanded. Aline's mouth opened. Her voice came out, soft, gentle. It sounded like the voice she used when she was trying to be kind. And that's when she realized the horror. The house didn't just take women, it borrowed their lives. It gave them a new one. Aline was not the only one being replaced. Every woman who had disappeared had been replaced by a copy made from the house's memories, stitched together with stolen pieces. The village had been living next to a nightmare without knowing it. Mama Nirabera walked out to the road, holding a small basket. Inside were pieces of cloth torn from women's scarves. She placed them on the ground. "These are for the ones who are lost," she said, voice calm as if she were selling bread. Aline's heart hammered. "No," she whispered. Mama Nirabera's eyes met hers. "You can leave," she said softly, "but you must choose." Aline's voice trembled. "What choice?" Mama Nirabera raised the basket. "You can leave the house, but you must leave something behind." Aline looked at the women in the road. Some of them were crying. Some of them were angry. Some of them were empty. Aline felt her own memories flicker. Her husband's face appeared, then vanished. Her own laughter, her own fear, her own name blurred. The house was stealing her slowly, piece by piece. And Aline had to decide what to sacrifice. Aline ran back into the house. She slammed the door. She didn't want to leave. She didn't want to stay, but the house had already decided for her. In the hallway, she found Claudine, or what looked like Claudine. Claudine's eyes were vacant. The women of the village gathered outside the house like a storm about to break. They carried sticks, torches, and old family talismans, objects meant to ward off evil. Their faces were hardened by grief, anger, and the heavy weight of suspicion. Aline stood among them, shaking, not because she was afraid, because she was terrified of what she might become. Mama Nirabera stepped out onto the porch and watched them with the patience of someone waiting for the end of a ritual. "Go home," she said softly. But the women did not move. They had waited too long. One of them, Mirembe, stepped forward. "We know what you are," she said. Her voice cracked, but her eyes were strong. "We've been taking our sisters." Mama Nirabera smiled. "I don't take them," she said. "I give them a second life." Aline's stomach turned. "Second life," she repeated. Mama Nirabera nodded. "The house was built by a woman who lost everything," she explained. Her husband drowned, her children died, the village refused to help her, so she built a home to keep her memories alive. The crowd murmured. Aline's mind raced. "A house built from pain," she whispered. Mama Nirabera continued. She realized the only way to keep her loved ones was to keep women, because women carry memory, women carry stories. The house learned that if it ate a woman's truth, it could keep her alive in its walls. The women outside gasped. Aline felt cold. "You're saying the house is alive?" she asked. Mama Nirabera's eyes flicked toward the window. "Yes," she said, "and it is hungry." The house groaned, as if in agreement. The women raised their torches. Aline heard a voice inside her head, not hers, not the house's, someone else. "Don't burn it." The voice sounded like Claudine. Aline spun around. Claudine stood in the doorway behind her, eyes still vacant, but her voice clear. "I'm still here," she whispered. "I'm still me." Mirembe raised her torch higher. "You're a monster," she shouted at Mama Nirabera, "and you're using the house as an excuse." The old woman's smile faded. "You don't understand," she said. "I am not the monster." Aline stepped forward. Then who is? The house answered. The walls began to pulse, and the plaster peeled away, revealing the faces trapped inside, thousands of women's faces. Not just the ones who stayed recently, women from generations. Aline saw her own face among them, older, distorted, stitched into the wall. She screamed. The village women gasped, stepping back. The house's voice rose, deep and resonant. "I am not a house," it said. "I am a woman." The crowd fell silent. Mama Nirabera whispered, almost lovingly, "She was the first woman." The walls shifted. The lake inside the house rose again. A figure emerged from the water. Wet hair, pale skin, eyes black as the deepest night. The woman looked at Aline and smiled with Aline's mouth. "You came back," she said softly. Aline felt something break inside her, because the woman wasn't only using her voice, she was using her body. The house had been waiting for Aline to return, not as a victim, as a vessel. The village women raised their torches again, but the woman in the water spoke one last time. "Burn the house," she whispered. "Burn me." And Aline realized the truth. The house wasn't evil. It was a trap of grief, a living monument to pain. And it had been waiting for someone to give it permission to end. Aline stepped forward. She opened the wooden box. Inside, she placed her own scarf, her own identity. She held it over the fire. The flames rose higher. The house trembled. The lake water inside the walls surged. The woman in the water began to scream. But the scream wasn't a scream of pain. It was a scream of release. The walls began to crack. The faces trapped in the plaster started to break free, like birds emerging from a cage. The women's voices rose in chorus, shouting names, crying, laughing. Aline felt her own memories rush back, her husband's face, her own laughter, her own voice. The house began to collapse inward. But as it did, the original woman looked at Aline and whispered, "You can't leave without taking me with you." Aline froze. The woman in the water stepped closer, her wet fingers reaching for Aline's throat. Aline realized the final twist. The house wasn't just a house. It was a body. And it needed a new vessel. Aline screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the flames. The woman in the water merged with Aline's body. Aline felt herself change. Her voice shifted, her eyes darkened. The village women watched in horror as Aline's body began to become the house. She became the new Nirabera. The woman in the water smiled with Aline's mouth. "Thank you," she whispered. And then the house was gone. Only ashes remained. The village women stood in silence, staring at the fire. Aline's body lay on the ground, still, lifeless. But her eyes opened. And when she spoke, her voice wasn't hers. It was the house. It was the woman. It was the lake. And it said, "The next house is already being built." If you thought this was scary, wait till you see what the house did to the next victim. Subscribe for the next episode.